Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. My name is Leslie Guadalupe Renteria Salome, and I walk by Lupe. I am from the lands of Acapulco, Guerrero in Mexico, and I am speaking to you from the unceded territories of Kumi Islands, known as San Diego. And I bring with me today my lived experiences as an undocumented mujer with background in grassroots organizing, youth leadership development, immigrant education, and ancestral ceremonial practices. I began organizing at the age of 14 in San Diego and have continued movement work ever since. And I say I have experienced this invisible leadership pipeline, a pathway that has allowed me to take on different roles in the social change ecosystem. And over the years, I have also witnessed how young leaders reimagine the youth development field, the youth development and leadership framework, and the pipeline infrastructure that we experienced to get to the next step and phase in our life. And now my commitment is to co-create sacred and safe spaces for youth to process their mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health. It is one of the ways that I pay forward the blessings that have been invested in me by mentors, femtors, coaches, and guides. Now I am a thought partner, and I find myself in spaces with influence and access, in spaces that develop young people's leadership journey. And so I continue to build relationships with CEOs, executive directors, and important people who have power in the state. And one of the questions that I'm constantly asked is how can we get youth perspective in our work? How can we get involved with young people and listen to them? And there's some folks who are already a step ahead and have done their homework to set a framework and strategic planning of how to engage young people. And there's also those who are feeling called to invite them into their spaces. And so we explore, what does youth engagement look like for them? What can that look like in their own specific organization? And so I show them the heart's ladder of young people's participation, which is a journey, a platform for folks to reflect on the different stages of youth engagement that moves towards youth adult equity, and shifts from youth manipulation and tokenism to shared collective power in decision making. And you'll see in the chart, this is the whole entire graph where we talk about youth services, youth organizing, and where we want to be for young people to be change makers. Moving away from tokenism, youth informed, and inviting them to join our decision making spaces, inviting them in our trainings, and inviting them in shared space where we both learn from and with each other. Um, and being able to really develop authentic youth partnerships and organizing spaces where youth and adult feel comfortable enough to share their truths and share their ideas without judgment, and feel that they are enough, um, by their lived experiences. Um, and it has become a lot more clear over the years, and especially in 2020, we've seen the importance and the value of community voice, and in particularly the young people's voice and experiences. That they've been able to push policies, they've been able to transform a lot of the conditions that we've been advocating for years, that a lot of our yelders and elders have been advocating for years. We look up to, because I am a young person as well, we look up to a lot of our elders' wisdom, our young elders, which are folks who are transitioning or in their prime time in their organizing or professional role. And we've been seeing how, if when we move towards youth adult equity, we give decision making power to young leaders who are living and thriving in the disinvested communities that a lot of foundations, organizations tend to invest in. And they're also challenging traditional principles that continue to perpetuate inequity, power, and privilege. And a lot of the times it manifests and causes harm to our young people. And so when we speak about youth engagement and intergenerational spaces, folks must first start seeing young adults as equal partners and creating spaces to integrate them as part of their team. Then not be considered as a second opinion or as a consultant. But if they are considered as a consultant, it is okay, and they should be getting paid and compensated for the consultancy work that they are doing. And so as we consider young people as part of our integrating part of the team, we also must consider what does it mean to see and engage with young people as partners. And I will remind folks that in order to consider young people as partners, we must bring in the young person's entire being, right? Systems and institutions must recognize that as young people, we carry ancestral and generational trauma for over 500 years of colonization and brutality. And unless we address this and invite this part of ourselves in the spaces we are in and in our movements, we will continue to perpetuate colonial hegemonic practices. And part of that is doing the healing work and making sure that we are developing practices into our leadership development that invest in our health and invest and lifts up health promotion. And so my provocation and my challenge to you all, as you all consider or are curious to invite young people into your own organization, what are you willing to give and offer? What internal shifts must happen in order for your organization, for the people in power to share the power? Is youth experience and wisdom enough for you? Because I have young people who don't believe in code switching and they show up as who they are. Will that be okay? Would you invite them in as their true selves? And I invite you to ask yourself, what support do you need to fully show up and listen to you? Am I ready and youth and culturally competent to engage in dialogue with young people? Am I ready to step into radical imagination with you? Because this goes beyond empowering young people, right? We must build and this trust and be willing to trust them with the power that we also have. And I'm here with you today and sharing with you my experiences as well, because someone believed in me and trusted me enough with their power. Thank you. And I hope that this is an opportunity for you to just be more curious about how can you all move towards innovation and radical imagination.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I hope you all enjoyed that. Excited to dive into this conversation with Lupe. I feel like we're already besties and she just doesn't know yet, but you are in my head. So I'm really excited for this conversation. I hope you all have dropped your questions into the chat. But to start, I'll kick us off. My question for you, Lupe, to start is as a child of immigrants, I personally know firsthand experience and see the world. So what role has that played for you on your journey to all the amazing work you've done and plan to do?
Oh, yes. And again, thank you all for having me in this space. It has really shaped, I think, being away from my homeland and being away from cultures and traditions that were part of me and were left behind, really remind me to stay grounded and stay rooted and be and show up in spaces with intention of not just inclusivity, but really authentic representation of who I am as an individual, as a leader, as a daughter of undocumented immigrants. So I think a big part of that is just, it really reminds me to stay grounded and true to who I am and where I come from, in order for much of the work that I do to be real, right? I think that's what a lot of folks are asking for and need and want, and when we think about social change.
I love it. Love it. I will keep going. Yes, I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'm going to ask another one. So Lupe, here we go again. You spoke a lot about the role adults can play in creating a space for youth, because as we know, that can be difficult a lot of the times for a young person when you're integrating yourself into the workspace and working with older generations. How have you managed to successfully navigate this dynamic?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I am still trying to navigate as I step into right, an upcoming early career professional. What has been helpful, I think for me, I had to really realize what it feels like and looks like to be tokenized, what it feels and looks like to be manipulated as a young person. And I think as a young person, I didn't understand what that meant. Until I had a mentor and a coach who really was true to not tokenizing. And that meant, hey, Lupe, what do you want to see in this workshop? Hey, Lupe, what do you want to leave this workshop? So a big part of that for me was having folks who are willing to co-create much of the spaces that I was going to be a part of, right? It's not just me being inserted, but giving me and trusting me that my ideas were more than enough. So I think that was probably the first time that I felt a lot more comfortable in a lot of the spaces. And a big part of that is also not filtering my experiences. I think I had to like learn that it's okay to not use big fancy jargon and terminology. That for me, and which is why I also asked, like, is code switching necessary for a young person? So part of me was like, okay, I don't have to use fancy language right now, right? There's going to come a point where I am going to be using the code switching and these fancy jargon because it's necessary in the spaces that I'm going to be a part of. But I guess that affirmation and reminder that that was okay at that time really allowed me to just evolve and grow as I went through my journey.
I love. Okay, so I want to dig a little bit deeper into what you just said about code switching, because I know especially for young people and people of color, that term can have a very negative connotation to it. So to you, what does code switching mean? Is it necessary as a young person? You kind of alluded to the fact that it might be in certain spaces. Can you just unpack that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, I think when I was younger, I would hear all of these really important people using fancy words, and I was like, okay, let me Google that. Or I will pull up my phone and Google that while we're there. And I think part of me, I am perfectly okay with young people not having to use code or, code switch, because they must also know what that word looks and feels like for their own experiences. A word may not have a feeling, may not be able to come into a vision for some folks. So as least for me, as I went through my journey, I was able to put name into, institutional racism, systemic racism, right? But I first had to reflect on what that body experience was like, in order for me to understand what that word meant and the impact it had when I went into talking to a council member or went and talked to a rally with important people who were going to influence a campaign that I was leading. So I think a big part of that is understanding that bodily lived experience in order to put a name into that, and doing that introspection first.
Got it. I love. Yeah, no, that was really helpful. And then another segue into what you just mentioned. As a young person, how have you found yourself in these spaces with these people in positions of power, as you put it? How did you get there? How did you find yourself in these spaces, and how have you successfully navigated those spaces so you can stay there?
Yeah, I mean, I started when I was 14. I got involved with youth organizing, community organizing for safe park and recreational spaces in my local community in City Heights, San Diego. And a big part of that for me, I didn't know the power of my story. I knew there was something different about me when it came down to being an undocumented young person. And I think that identity that I held on for so long really limited me from even sharing my lived experiences until I got told, hey, there's power in storytelling. And I remember going and canvassing to register people to vote. And I was like, why am I registering people to vote? I can't even vote. But I think being able to, a mentor allowed me to reframe that and say your lived experience and your intention behind this is because lots of these policies will impact you as well, even when you don't have that political power, right, or act to vote. So I think part of me was understanding that although I did not have that access and I wasn't eligible to vote, I knew that lots of what I was advocating for was going to still impact me. And so I stayed around for the last 8 years and slowly moved in different directions, in different roles in the social change ecosystem, from research about youth organizing to consultant now and supporting youth engagement work. And how can we better support our young people's leadership development and allow them to still have agency in a lot of their campaign work.
Love it. You're so brilliant. Again, why you're my best friend in my head. Another question. You spoke a lot and you mentioned it throughout your piece about mentorship. So we can tell what role mentors had in your life, but as a young person, how do I establish a mentor relationship with somebody? And as a seasoned professional, how do I serve as a mentor to somebody?
Ooh, good question. I'm actually developing like a mentorship program right now, and with one of my organizations that I'm supporting, and that question comes along very often. I think for me, I had to, one, mentorship looks different and it also gets established differently in many different ways. For me, I am a visual learner. So sometimes I don't officially name, hey, you're my mentor, but because we've been in so many spaces together, I am learning from how the person shows up and their leadership. Until later on, then I'm like, hey, by the way, like I learned X, Y, Z from you, and I am constantly admiring the way that you show up. So those are some ways that like I have been able to learn from folks. And there's those who have followed my journey since I was 14 years old. And I always go back to them and I just say, hey, like, I have to take a decision to go to college, Merced or San Diego. And so I think once I was able to establish trust, to get to that point where I'm going to take a life decision and a shift in my life, I think that for me also reminded me that I am growing with my mentors. Now, half of them are my friends, and that in itself is a transition for young people. When we've not necessarily outgrown our mentors, but we've been able to, how I said earlier, like grow with them, to where now they're the ones also asking me for guidance. So I think a lot of those mentorships and relationships are really just built on trust and transparency and openness to talk about everything and anything that the young person needs, aside from the role that this person holds.
Right. Love it. And to close us off, given everything that you said, you've shared a lot of amazing insight, but to wrap us up, if you could leave our attendees with one piece of advice, a single word, a short phrase, what would it be?
Yeah, I think I would invite folks to be curious, to build relationships with someone who they may not necessarily would build a relationship with. And sharing words of wisdom even when they may not necessarily see themselves as someone who carries that wisdom, because lived experiences from what I said, older elders are what young people need right now, especially as we're taking, or young people are in the front lines at this exact moment, leading lots of the efforts for social change. So I would truly encourage y'all to just be curious and tap into a young person's wisdom. Say, hey, you know, what should I learn and know in my role to be able to better support and show up for young people.
Lupe, thank you so much. This was amazing. We really appreciate you being here today, and I honestly can't say thank you enough. I hope everyone took a lot away from it as much as I did, so thank you.
Thank you, Halima.